We got two major injuries across the NBA to Anthony Edwards and to Cade Cunningham. Cade Cunningham was diagnosed with a collapsed lung and is expected to miss some extended time. And now Anthony Edwards is also out as well, which happened a couple of days ago. We're talking about two franchise players and what it means at this critical point for each team. All that and more right after this.
Welcome to the number one place for your daily basketball news and analysis, NBA Central.
What's going on, basketball fans? Welcome to another episode of NBA Central, your number one spot for everything basketball related. I'm the host there, Haize, but more importantly, you guys can follow the channel at NBA Central Pod on every social media platform we happen to be on. With that said, let's go ahead and get into this content for today, y'all. And Cade Cunningham suffers a collapsed lung, which is a serious situation, right? This is not about Cade Cunningham rushing back. Health is going to come first in this one. The timeline is very unpredictable in a situation like this, right? So let's talk about the impact this is going to have on the Detroit Pistons. Cade Cunningham is their engine. Is the end all be all. Like, he is their engine. He is playing at a damn near MVP caliber level this season. When you look at the chemistry between Cade Cunningham and Jalen Duren, has been such an instrumental part of Jalen Duren and his rise this season, which looks like he may be on pace to be most improved player of the year this year. Cade Cunningham is having an absolute tremendous season. And to lose him at this time of the season, where the Boston Celtics just got Jason Tatum back a few games, right? And this is a team that still is only 3.5 games back of the Detroit Pistons of that number one seed. This does now change it to where we can't say that it's impossible that the Boston Celtics could take the number one seed from the Detroit Pistons. Now, like I said, this is bigger than basketball, right? The thing that's most important here is Cade Cunningham's health. That takes the precedence here. But when you look at Cade Cunningham, he is 13th in the NBA in scoring, second in assists at averaging right under 10, 9.9, right under 10 assists per game. He's shooting the ball 46% from the field this season and 34% from three-point line, which is the second highest mark of his NBA career. Cade Cunningham has been playing at a tremendous level, also averaging a steal and a half per game as well. There's just no doubt about it that Cade Cunningham has had a great impact this season, right? But the question now becomes about it is that what's going to happen with the Detroit Pistons? Can they keep enough of the pace? Can they hold off enough? This is still a well-constructed team. It's still a very well-constructed team. But the problem is that, when you have somebody like Cade Cunningham who is so important to this. But for what it's worth, the Detroit Pistons are 5-2 in 7 games without Cade Cunningham this season. 5-2. That's still more than a winning record. And Jalen Duren has had to step up in games like that. So when you look at players like Dennis Jenkins and other players like that, there's going to have to step up in a major way with Cade Cunningham going to be out if they're going to want to keep pace and still have the home court advantage in the playoffs. And that is an important thing, especially for a young team like the Detroit Pistons, that this is their first year being this good, right? And so when you have a team that's this young and this well constructed, how those pieces fit together is hugely important to all of that. So now you have to, if you are the Detroit Pistons, hope that you're going to get enough of it to keep that staved off. Now, for what it's worth, Jalen Duren is also averaging 19 points per game. Duncan Robinson's averaging 11.8 per game. Asur Thompson, he's been really solid this season, especially defensively. But they're going to need somebody to step up and at least organize the offense, even if a player can't step up. And Cade Cunningham was leading the Pistons in scoring at 24.5 points per game. If they don't have somebody, they don't. Let me not say if. They don't have somebody who's going to come in and replace that production one for one. So they're going to have to do it as a team. And that's what this next step is all about for the Detroit Pistons. Can they do enough, right, to hold off the Boston Celtics? Now, even if they do fall to the second seed, then there still is, they still have home court advantage in everything but the NBA final, so the Eastern Conference Finals, if they were to make that. And that's a thing there, right? But this is now an important run. When you look at this for the Detroit Pistons, for example, I'll say this. Not only does Jalen Duren become so much more important, but Jalen Duren now, with this time without Cade Cunningham, can do nothing but solidify his run at Most Improved Player of the Year this year. And so that's a good mark to look at when it comes down to that one. Jalen Duren is probably that. He's averaging 19 points, 10.6 rebounds per game, shooting 64% from the field. And it's a huge leap from what he did last season, where he only averaged 11.8 points per game. He's stepped up defensively as well, and it's good to see. So now with no Cade Cunningham in the lineup, you're going to need to see more and more of those type of performances for Jalen Duren, and he is going to become an even bigger part than he already was without Cade Cunningham being there. Can he get it done? That is the question that is here. And I do think that he can. I think that Jalen Duren's going to be able to do that. But it did say this. They put out an official statement on Cade Cunningham's injury, and they said this. After further testing, Pistons guard Cade Cunningham has been diagnosed with a left lung pneumothorax. Listen, I know I murdered that. Cunningham exited Tuesday's game versus the Wizards in the first quarter. He will be reevaluated in 2 weeks. So there's a good chance that he could miss the rest of the regular season. That's what I'm reading. That's what I'm saying. I'm not a medical doctor, so we'll see. So again, with the Boston Celtics only 3.5 games behind them, and the New York Knicks 5 games behind them, with roughly most teams have between like 15 and 12-ish games left on the season, this is going to be an important stretch because the Detroit Pistons, if they can still go above 500 in this stretch of the season, it's going to say a lot about how they're going to finish the season and what it means for the seeding in the playoffs. So it's an important part. We'll see how they shake it out, how they get it done. But with that said, it's now into the next one. And this is something that I missed. Anthony Edwards is also going to be out for some considerable time, right? And there's just no doubt that Anthony Edwards is the face of that franchise. He's their primary scorer. He's also one of their best on-ball creators as well. And he's somebody that when you look at them going on the runs that they've gone on in the last 2 postseasons, it's been a lot because of Anthony Edwards. Now, he has knee inflammation. He's going to be reevaluated in 1 to 2 weeks, but this could very well shut down the rest of what of the regular season for Anthony Edwards as well, or at least a big chunk of it, right? And so you look at Minnesota and where they sit right now in the Western Conference. They are 4th in the Western Conference, right? They are 6-4 in their last 10 games. They've won a 2-game winning streak, but they're only 1 game ahead of both the Houston Rockets and the Denver Nuggets, which are the 5th and the 6th seed. But even more concerning a little bit is that they're only 3.5 games ahead of the Phoenix Suns. Now, I do think most likely than not, the Phoenix Suns are going to end up staying in the play-in race. They're going to stay in that play-in area. But if you're the Minnesota Timberwolves, you want to make sure that you avoid that. Now, they are a well-coached team. Chris Finch is a really good coach. They've already had players like Bones Highland and Ayo Dosunmu step up in some games with Anthony Edwards out, and that's fine. That's what you need. And that's why, they went out and got a player like Ayo Dosunmu to add to that team to bring in some depth. But they're going to need to play. They're going to need to figure it out. And while Ayo is a really good creator in transition, half court, that's where you're going to have to rely on some other things because you're not going to create in the same way that Anthony Edwards did. So while you're going to get an opportunity to look at Ayo and what he can see, I think you're really looking at Ayo, Bones Highland, and Julius Randle to even step up his game quite considerably over this time period to see what is it going to look like for this team. So I'll say this for Ayo, right, is that Ayo Dosunmu is a player. You guys know I'm very familiar with Ayo Dosunmu as a Chicago Bull. He started 2 games so far for this Minnesota Timberwolves team, and he's been solid enough in those 2 starts, right? Against Utah, 23 points, 9 rebounds, 6 assists, 3 steals, only 1 turnover. That's what Ayo has the capability of doing. Of course, Ayo is really good when he's playing off of better players. That's just how Ayo is. 19 points he had against Phoenix as well. The Phoenix team that we talked about, and, being worried about kind of trying to move out of that playing area. So, there are things that both these teams have in the Minnesota Timberwolves and Detroit Pistons that can help them. The Minnesota Timberwolves have Julius Randle, have really good coaching, they have depth, and they have players like Bones Highland and Ayo, who, while inconsistent, have stepped up before in prior roles. Ayo stepped up as a starter for the Chicago Bulls almost every time he needed to. He stepped up as a starter, and he found ways to absolutely fill it up. And that's really good. When you look at Ayo as a starter, he started 12 games so far this season, 10 for the Bulls, 2 for the Minnesota Timberwolves. In those 12 games, 17.5 points, 4 rebounds, 4 assists, almost a steal per game as well, only 2 turnovers per game, shooting the ball 50% from the field and 50% from 3. The Minnesota Timberwolves are going to need that version of Ayo Dosunmu if they are going to want to avoid the play-in. And I know with the space that they have between the play-in, it could be easily said, hey, you're worrying a little bit too much about the play-in. They probably got enough space. This is the Western Conference that we're talking about. And while there aren't a whole lot of games left on the season, I understand that there's still enough games to where that gap can be closed on. And and not to say that as long as Anthony Edwards is healthy, they can still make it out the play-in, no doubt about that. But you want to avoid that risk if you can, and try to avoid the chances of you potentially, falling back down and stuff like that. So, you don't want to go in the play-in because with the play-in, you have a couple of bad nights. You cannot make the playoffs. And that's the last thing that the Minnesota Timberwolves should want. When you look at it as well, between these 2 teams in Minnesota and Detroit, they don't necessarily have the toughest schedules. Detroit has the 15th hardest schedule remaining. Minnesota has the 11th hardest schedule remaining. Minnesota has 12 games left. Detroit has 14 games left, right? So if you're talking about both these guys missing multiple weeks, like I said, that's a majority of the rest of your season that you have left. Now you got to try to figure that out. So we'll see what these teams could do, man. But these do have playoff implications on this playoff race. And this is something that, Chris Finch already said no one can replace Ant, right? The scoring has to be spread out. The team execution is going to have to improve. The role players are going to have to step up. This is where your depth gets tested. This is where you could potentially turn this into a positive because your depth is going to be tested right before the playoffs. The Pistons dropping competitiveness in the Eastern Conference. Other teams in the New York Knicks and the Boston Celtics can gain ground. The last thing you want is both those teams to gain ground on you, and then you fall down to the third seed, which, again, it's very unlikely but possible. Then you look at the West. The Wolves, you want to avoid sliding into the play-in in the West. I don't care what your talent level is. You don't want to have to be there. The Suns are lurking. The Houston's lurking. Denver Nuggets are lurking, right? And if they take over that spot and push them down, it could get tougher. And matchups are such an important part of playoff, which we don't talk enough about, is how the matchups and those teams match up with each other becomes an even bigger part of the playoffs, especially in a team in a conference like the Western Conference, right? So the seeding battle now becomes very interesting. And while I know a lot of people look in March and April basketball as not necessarily the most competitive basketball, there's still a lot of teams fighting for something. And this could become and reverberate throughout the league and have a big conversation. Now, of course, there's a huge conversation that's been made here about injuries and workload and restricting the schedule, all that type of stuff. And we'll have that at another point in time, right? But losing your stars is at this time could be the worst thing for the NBA, because imagine a team like the Detroit Pistons goes down and then you have to go through a playoff series without Cade. Imagine the Minnesota Timberwolves, who have been in the Western Conference Finals the last 2 years, have to go through a playoff run without Anthony Edwards. That's a real possibility here, but we'll see what's going to happen. But first off, before we go, I want to say prayers up to Cade Cunningham, because you want him to get better. Detroit Pistons are one of my most fun teams to watch. Hopefully Anthony Edwards is back sooner rather than later. But now I want to hear from you guys. Which injury has the bigger impact? Cade in Detroit or Anthony Edwards in Minnesota? Which team do you think is better equipped to withstand the injuries to their two stars? Let me know what you guys think about that. This is NBA Central, where we break it all down. Real takes, real conversations. Hit that like button. Subscribe to the channel as well. You can follow us at NBA Central Pod. You send us any feedback, questions, comments, concerns. NBA Central Show at gmail.com. And then lastly, if you want to leave a text message and our voicemail for the mailbag, the number to do so, 773-270-2799. We're the #1 spot for everything basketball related. And I'll catch you guys the next time I feel like making a video. Probably tomorrow. Peace, y'all.
This has been a presentation of the Breaks Media.